Okay. Let's go to Portland. Portland's in a really interesting organizational situation because Damian Lillard is obviously a great player who I think is coming off of arguably his best statistical season. And I think that he is someone that can really grow and mature with like a lot of these guys in the potential top 5 here that they could take at number 3. They also have kind of a 2 timelines thing going a little bit right now, where they took Shaedon Sharpe last year as a little bit of a project, who had like an immense, unbelievable finish to the season over the course of his last 15 games or so. They have Anthony Simons, who is still quite young, 23 years old. He's kind of the midpoint of this timeline. But then they also have Damian Lillard, and then they have the free agency situation with Jeremy Grant. You could take this a lot of different ways. You could see Scoot Henderson as a really great athletic complement to Shaedon Sharpe. And then you could potentially look to move off of Damian Lillard. Or you could look at it as we could get Brandon Miller and continue to build around Dame, have Shaedon Sharpe as an upside player moving forward, Anthony Simons, we re-sign Jeremy Grant, we try and find an answer at center, maybe we trade for DeAndre Ayton, and then we're kind of cooking with gas a little bit with Damian Lillard, like maybe pushing us to compete, but I don't know realistically how much of a competitor that team is unless Brandon Miller like really is like a 22 point per game scorer by the time he's in year 3.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, another tough situation here for Portland, right? Because the avenues for them to become a legitimate title contender, they never really hinged on any pick other than Vic, right? As soon as they ended up not getting the number 1 overall selection, there's more work to be done than just drafting a guy at number 2 or number 3 or trading that pick for somebody that can come in and help you right away. Like there's still other things that they need to clean up of making guys fit together better on court for success in the modern NBA. The Shaedon Sharpe timeline throws a huge wrench in a lot of this. He's way too valuable of a piece long-term for them to sell on unless they're getting a bona fide superstar that absolutely vaults them into the title picture. But I don't know if those guys are out there this year. And it's just going to be a really fascinating time to watch what this front office does, particularly if Brandon Miller gets taken 2nd overall, because it's almost a binary A or B when Scoot Henderson is still on the clock. And I don't know where you come down on what you would prefer of draft Scoot and try to move on from Dame, start the new regime, or use that leverage of Scoot available at number 3 to try to trade and get as much as you can to win with Dame now. Where do you come down on that one?
I think they should be, look, me personally, I think they should be moving Damian Lillard and restarting new. The reason for that is I don't know if they have quite enough time to rebuild this roster in the necessary window of Damian Lillard's prime is what he has left, right? Yeah. So he turns 33 in the offseason. And again, Damian Lillard is coming off of one of his best seasons. He is unequivocally one of the best workers in the NBA, and he is one of the guys that like I genuinely want to see win more than anybody else in the NBA. I think that this is their opportunity to probably restart a little bit.
Yeah.
And I would take it, especially with a new front office. Like, I think this is a great opportunity for an off-ramp here if you're the Blazers. And I think there's like a real shot that you can build for the future without continuing to kind of stay in the middle like this.
Yeah.
This team's been stuck in the middle for a little bit too long now, it feels like, basically since they made the conference finals. What was that, 3 or 4 years ago now?
4 years ago, something like that. 19?
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago, whatever it was. So if I was them, I would just take the player. Now, in terms of what I wonder, I would expect that they explore every single potential avenue for this pick, right? What kind of star player can you get for the number 3 overall pick? Like, let's say that Chicago, or let's say Charlotte takes Brandon Miller at number 2, right? What happens if Scoot Henderson is on the board at number 3? Does Orlando offer you something crazy in order to get like their point guard of the future? Do they offer like number 6, number 11, and like Wendell Carter or something like that? Because they see Scoot as like the guy that they need in order to make Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner like really make sense long term.
Yeah.
Do they like, I'm trying to think of like other examples, right? I'm sure there are other examples out there that you could potentially find. Like, do the Nets offer Mikal Bridges and 21 and 22 and something else for number 3? Then you have Damian Lillard, Shaedon Sharpe, Anthony Simons, Mikal Bridges, Jeremy Grant. You still need an answer. Maybe it's Mikal Bridges, Nick Claxton, 22 and 21 for number 3.
Ooh.
I wouldn't do that if I was Portland. I'm just kind of wondering if that is like a thing that front office could consider if they want to go down the road of continuing to compete with Damian Lillard. I don't know.
I don't know either, Sam. And I'm not the cap tradeologist with all of the formulas in my head and the matching salaries and who's going to be a free agent this year. It just seems like it's an underwhelming time to try to be buying a star, because the teams who are most in the market for it and competing right now either don't have a ton of future pick capital or don't necessarily have a positional fit for a guy like Damian Lillard. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
I think that's exactly right. I am very fascinated to see where the Lillard situation goes.
Yeah.
I don't know what Portland's trajectory is right now. They have this newer front office that made a lot of future facing moves at the deadline, but was that goal in order to rebuild longer term, or was it to retool around Lillard this offseason?
Do you think there's any way they try to move Simons?
Maybe, possibly.
Like, let's say Scoot ends up being available at number 3 and they take Scoot and Dame. Do they try to move Simons and try to get back a bigger body in return?
I don't. So like, a name that could come up there is like OG Anunoby, right? Like the Raptors really need backcourt depth if Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent leave. Yep. You could see Anthony Simons as like an interesting fit there. Anthony Simons and number 3 for Anunoby is not a good deal. I don't think that Portland can do that. It could Anthony Simons in 23 for Anunoby be interesting. I probably don't do that if I'm Toronto.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a middle ground somewhere there. If you decide to continue building around Dame, though, like that's the thing. They have to make a call. Like this pick being at number 2 now, or number 3, I'm sorry, forces them to make the call on Lillard now, I think. Because it's an incredibly valuable asset that they could either trade for current value or they could use to select future value. And if you select future value, or if Scoot Henderson is on the board, you probably do then look to move Dame. I don't know how that's going to go. That's a fascinating predicament for Portland. I think they are, to me, the team I'm most interested in the top 3. Like the Spurs are going to take Vic. We know that.
Yeah.
Charlotte is interesting, but they don't have as many moving pieces as Portland does. Portland is the most interesting team. By the way, this Portland front office, I will note, they have a real tendency to draft young. We talked about Charlotte being, previously a bit of an older drafting team, more recently a bit of a younger drafting team. Portland, since Joe Cronin has been an assistant GM there, has been a young drafting team. They prefer to go with guys like, Zach Collins, Anthony Simons, Jabari Walker. Who else? I listed them all in
Shaden
the mock I did. Shaden Sharp certainly fits. Greg Brown, Nasir Little.
Yeah.
All of these guys were teenagers when they took them within the last few years. They have that real tendency to draft younger. I would think that like Brandon Miller, Amen Thompson, those guys wouldn't be too old for them necessarily. But it's worth noting that that is a reality of what they tend to do on the draft.
Yeah. And look, I think at the very top 4, 5, 6 picks, you tend to try to go for just the best players that you can get, right? It's less about age or things like that. You just want to make sure you're hitting on the most superstar upside or superstar type of player that you can. I'm just trying to sit here and envision what a split timeline would look like, where they keep the number 3 pick and Damian Lillard. And if it's Brandon Miller, I don't see a way in which this is a good enough team to be top 4 or 5 in the West next year. I don't know if I see an avenue for that.
I tend to agree.
And if it's Scoot, they probably have to trade Simons. And I don't know if they would get a lot back for Simons that vaults them into that territory either.
It's interesting. Like Simons plus for OG is an interesting construction to me. Yeah. There has to be a middle ground there in some way if they decide to go that route.